Hey everybody, I'm Amy.
I'm Paul.
And this is the Comics Haul. We've got a bit of a different show for you guys today. It's a little
Yes, we do.
convention themed,
Yes.
unconventional convention show.
Oh, no, it's super conventional. Off to a great start.
Rip roaring start.
Starting strong. Yeah, we've got a bit of a relaxed fit episode, if you will. Usually we've done some great episodes on some great creators. We did a bit of a deep dive or a 101 class on Moon Knight. So now we kind of want to just get everyone in the con spirit, get ready for this little doozy that's coming up behind me and Amy here. Sideshow Con. Yeah, right. Oh, right. I was gonna say we all have our look at us wearing our team uniforms.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got Sideshow Con coming up soon. Before we get too far into it, though, we want to let our moderator introduce herself, so you guys know who you're talking to in the chats.
Yes, yeah, me, Cassidy. And as always, I am watching on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the Let Your Geek Sideshow Facebook group, YouTube, all of that stuff. So just let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, Cassidy will be there to help you out with anything if you want to share some stories. We're going to be having a lot of fun today because we are talking about conventions, but we are talking also about how comic books deal with conventions, because obviously the most well-known type of a con is a comic con. So we want to talk about the relationship between comics and cons. Before we get into that, though, we do have some comic book based news. Very exciting, spinning out of the world of Marvel Comics. Marvel has announced its plans to print nearly 20 titles that were previously digital exclusive. You may remember earlier in the year, we did announce that Marvel had foregone the printing process for several series. A lot of them were mini books. So they left you with a weird kind of gap in the collection. Right. But no longer. Marvel has announced that they will be printing titles. So in the fall, I believe it begins August through October, you'll be able to purchase physical copies of the books like Jane Foster Valkyrie, Hawkeye Freefall, Ghost Spider, Star, Avengers of the Wasteland, and more that were all soft canceled earlier this year. Yes. You may already have them digitally. I know for sure that I'm going to be buying double copies because my desire to save my money is outweighed only by my desire to have a numerically complete comic book collection.
Whoa.
I'm excited about that.
The woes of a comic book collector. All right, moving right along. Images of Kristen Wiig's Cheetah from the upcoming Wonder Woman 84 film have been leaked from promotional teasers, as well as Funko and other upcoming collectible products. So again, this is just a brief, we wanted to let people know that if you wanted to see what Kristen Wiig is going to look like as Cheetah in Wonder Woman 84, it's out there. You can see it, but this is a, use caution if you are, trying to stay pure and not watch any of the trailers or really know anything going in. Like myself, like I thought I was, but I definitely looked it up, and it looks really cool.
I think it looks amazing.
It's so rad.
It's dangerous to be a collector and a comic book fan who wants to keep their impressions unspoiled, because Funko and Lego will always get you with those looks. But I don't think comic book fans will be disappointed with the way Cheetah is turning out.
It looks great, guys, but a Comics Haul warning. We're letting you know, use caution if you don't want to know what it looks like. Just a heads up. It's out there, though.
Yep. Speaking of big comic book events and releases and teases for what's next, Marvel has announced its next event after the one they just started today, Empire. And the 10 of Swords, the X of Swords, you may have seen, the X-Men book that's coming up later this year. The winter event for Marvel Comics will be King in Black, which is spearheaded by Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman. You may have seen teasers earlier in the last week that say Null is coming. And if you're not reading the Venom storyline, you may not know. Null is the god of the symbiotes. He is the creator of All Black, the Necro Sword. He has a connection to the kind of symbiote beast Grendel, and he is a formidable, scary villain from out beyond the stars, and he makes all the symbiotes tremble beneath him. So this will be a really cool heavy metal action, epic storytelling, and Cthulhu dark horror story for fans of Venom, of Donny Cates, Ryan Stegman, of all that kind of. I think heavy metal in the sense of like Tarna and that whole storyline as well. There's going to be a lot of that like dark sword and sorcery.
Right. Yeah. So
really
like
cool.
Yeah, I mean it looks awesome. The Stegman and Donny Cates video that they posted on their Twitter, which was hilarious and it was really cool. So you guys can check that out too if you just look up Donny Cates on Twitter. But moving along to this week begins the launch of free comic book day titles being distributed in stores. That being X-Men, Asterix, My Little Pony, Power Rangers, and Weird Books. Is it Weird?
Yeah, it's Weird Books.
Weird Books. Yeah, it is Weird Books.
That's a smaller, it's a smaller indie publisher, kind of giving a sampler of their stories.
I think I've only ever said it out loud once, maybe. And I was like, you know what? Why not try it again today? And so 5 of the free comic book day titles will release per week, starting this week, all the way up until September 9th. Obviously, in lieu of the heart-wrenching cancellation of the May event. So, be on the lookout for some of those free comic book day, books basically from this week up until September 9th.
Yeah, and always make sure you're in contact with your local comic book store. You're following best safety guidelines. But if they are receiving these free comic book day books, be sure that they can hold some aside for you. I believe today's X-Men release also ties into 10 of Swords that will be coming out from Marvel later this year. So taking a look at last year in comics, Publishers Weekly has just kind of announced the combined sales of graphic novels and periodicals, so that's like the weekly, monthly comics, in the United States and Canada for 2019 totaled roughly $1.21 billion. $1 billion. That is a lot of comics, people. That is incredible. And that was an 11% increase from 2018 sales. So comics are still going strong. I will be very interested to see how numbers look this year in comparison with last year, but we need to make sure that the industry is on an upswing despite whatever setbacks we may have experienced this year. But this is cool. We got some cool stats. If you want to, Paul, you want to kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, interestingly enough, in North America alone, graphic novels accounted for $765 million. Weekly, floppy copies were 355 million in that lump sum total there, and digital comics are around $90 million, which is great to see, especially since we at the Comics Hall, one of the things that we preach more than anything is buy your comics, always buy your comics. And like we're talking about free comic book day, Amy mentions all the time, and I love the way you phrase it. It's the free comic book day. Those books are free to you, but they're not free to the shop. So it's really great to see that people, like you said, they're still on an upswing and they are still being supported. But yeah, that number for graphic novels is insane.
Yeah. And it was very interesting. The article that published this statistic noted that the shift in graphic novels has been firstly because a lot of people like to trade weight. Some people don't find it as economical to buy the weekly books, but the children's graphic novel kind of drive, the fact that people are now realizing, because a lot of people believe like, oh, those aren't comics. The picture books aren't comics, but the children's graphic novel market is huge, and so is the adult. Even outside of Marvel and DC, some publishers go straight to graphic novel format, and these books are sold in comic stores, chain bookstores, online retailers, Scholastic Book Fairs, if anyone remembers those. And I really liked this tidbit. They specified this data came from NPD Bookscan and Diamond Comics distributors. The prices, so that 1.21 billion, does not reflect any discounts if a store held a sale or any markup if they priced a variant cover higher. All of these are based solely on the full retail price of books. So the number could flux a little bit based on how many sales a store discounts a store held, or how many hundreds of dollars someone charged for one rare variant cover. But for the cover price of books, $1.21 billion. That's amazing.
That is a lot of dollars.
It's more dollars than I have.
Yeah, it's 1.21 billion more dollars than I currently have, I think. Well, speaking of the comic book industry and making money, let's get into something that usually helps that quite a bit. We are here to sort of give you a fun, not necessarily a deep dive, but sort of a relaxed fit episode and talk about conventions. We're going to kind of go over real fast the history of Comic-Con specifically, because that's coming up, and oh man,
Yeah, I was gonna say to what inspired us was not only the San Diego's Comic-Con at Home, which is coming up, because someone reminded me, hey, in a different world, we would have all been packing for Comic-Con right now.
Oh yeah.
But that doesn't mean we're not preparing, because Sideshow will be hosting Sideshow Con from the 20th to the 26th. So you can tune into that. There will be a bevy of other industry presences who are all making their best offerings for what would have been at Comic-Con this year, still bringing that to you. But we are in the throes of prepping for Sideshow Con. It's going to be amazing. We will have a Comics Hall episode during Sideshow Con, but it will be on the Thursday instead of the Wednesday. Right. But before we kind of get into this new age of what Sideshow Con is, and maybe that's the future of conventions, we wanted to take it back to the history of where these humble little shows started before they became the Hall H blockbuster giants that we know today.
Right. And which it, we'll get into it. I mean, we've only we've got a lot to talk about. We've only designated a little bit of time, but the Hall H madness that we all know, that Marvel, madness, it wasn't that long ago that started, really. I mean, Comic-Con really took off in 1970. And that is mainly in part to at the time, a 36-year-old man named Sheldon Dorff, who, with, the help of some funding from his parents, who had just recently, I believe, sold a toy store out in Chicago. He'd had some funding. And then also sort of the free labor that he got from a bunch of excited fellow geeks out in the San Diego area. We got what we know now as Comic-Con, and it originally started at the Grant Hotel. It's crazy now to think, it's funny, it's hindsight's 2020, but it started in a basement. I mean, that's really where they threw all of these folks who were like, we really want, just to celebrate, fandom at the time. I don't even know if they were calling it fandom, but they really just wanted a place to celebrate like-mindedness and being a geek. And really the first con, one thing that's really important to remember is that it was kind of split into two. The first one was in March, had maybe 200 people, which, could you imagine Comic-Con with only 200 people now?
200 people is the line for the bathroom now at Comic-Con.
Yeah, I've waited in 200, a 200 people queue for a churro before. It was an exclusive Comic-Con churro though, so it was great. But it started at, the basement of the Grant Hotel, 200 people, and then with the success of that, the Grant Hotel brought him back in August. And there was that was the bigger show, because not only did they have, some pulp movies showing. So, I mean, right from the get-go, they realized that film and every level of geekdom was celebrated at Comic-Con. That is ingrained in the history of Comic-Con. There's a really funny excerpt, and there's so much fun stuff about how Comic-Con got started. I don't want to weigh us down with that, but basically, Sheldon Dorff was trying to get all of these kids basically to say, like, hey, I'm a comic book insider, trust me. And no one believed him. And then he called up Roz Kirby, who's Jack Kirby's wife, and said, hey, put him on the phone. She puts him on the phone and talks to him, and from then, like, they were sold. And now Sheldon Dorff, again, there's going to be people out there. Yes, he does have an interesting relationship with Comic-Con as we know it now, but we do owe him many layers of respect for basically spearheading what we know as Comic-Con and the idea of North American conventions now. But it grew, and I have so many, like, I was so excited when we were looking this up, because I have so many like little tidbits of, like, this is when this started, and this is when like the masquerade, the cosplay masquerade, the first one was in 1974. I mean, that was only 4 years. So, like, cosplay or costume playing is again built and ingrained into the very fibers of what built Comic-Con, and honestly made people, I think, probably feel more comfortable going to these conventions, because they're like, oh, I can go here and not just be made not just be accepted, but be celebrated. And I mean, again, that's inherently what the bottom line of Comic-Con is.
I had the privilege actually to be part of the Sideshow team that awarded a prize that we sponsored for the Masquerade last year, and just the way in which people outpour their creativity is amazing. And I love seeing in the research we did that the older program booklets, which have now also become collectible in their own right with unique cover art every year. The 1975 program has like an ad that you could get. There were limited edition vinyl records that they pressed that had speeches and discussions from the con. Basically, the live streams that we have today of panels and booth tours and stuff. This would be, you would send away for the panel discussion, and there was a different
cool.
like it just blows my mind. But it was $5.98 for convention members and $6.50 for non-attendees, and you could get the LP that had people like, I mean, you mentioned Jack Kirby, like Jack Kirby at a convention, and Stan Lee, Chuck Norris, Ray Bradbury, Jerry Siegel.
Oh yeah.
And there was a point at which these guys were just, and I don't, just is such a dirty word, but just comic book creators, you know, like there was a day that Stan Lee, where the people in the know were like, yes, Stan Lee's a big deal. But like the whole world didn't know Stan Lee. That wasn't like the household name, and just all these people, and the way that Comic-Con gave fans a platform to interact and celebrate their love. It gave professionals who, many of whom would be often overlooked, I'm sure. I mean, even at these shows nowadays, there's smaller names that are no less deserving of attention. And when people get the chance to interact with those creators they love, like that's the platform Comic-Con provides. And so it's a twofold, where it boosts the careers of those already in the industry, but it gives the people who are the consumers of that industry the chance to interact and celebrate and express and be a part of that culture.
Right. And I think what's again, we'll kind of wrap the our love of Comic-Con and where it came from up in a second. But I think what's really great about Comic-Con and what it does is, even then and even now, is that it takes these people who I love the word that Sheldon Dorff uses, that they were up on a pantheon. They seemed untouchable, to some of us. Like you see creators and people, like you think you've got the Stan Lees, you've got Jim Lee, you've got Jeff Johns, all of these huge comic book creators. And then not to mention now you've got artists, and you've got actors and people that you constantly see and maybe even obsess over because you love their work. Comic-Con brings them under a roof and makes them real, and allows them, or allows you to be like, oh my, I'm breathing the same air as Tom Hiddleston right now. Like, like we have the same air. And as like dorky as that sounds, I mean, ultimately that's what it is that it allows you to realize, like, these people, these actors in this moment where, I'm already using Tom Hiddleston. He's playing Loki. Like it's precious because he's not always gonna be playing Loki. And so like right now in that moment, like it's cool to just, really celebrate that. And I think Sheldon Dorff and company really understood that from the get-go, of like how precious being around a bunch of people that, again, not only tolerate you, but celebrate all of the weird, dorky things that you learn to love, that allows me and Amy to do what we do. And, and it's just like, you can go to Comic-Con and be around like-minded folks. And that's really what it is at its heart.
Yeah. And before we take a break for questions, comments, and et cetera, I want to remind you guys that we've got Sideshow Con next week. That'll be running from July 20th to the 26th. You can go to side.show/con for more information. I think Cassidy will drop some links in social. But one of the key aspects to the con is interaction. And now, while things are different right now, and we do have to be socially distanced and maintain safety measures, we have created a physical booth space that it is private, but it will augment the online experience that we typically offer. And I know that most people in our audience probably are only familiar with our online Comic-Con because the way that the Comic-Cons have exploded over the years, it is very exclusive to get into San Diego Comic-Con. It's very difficult. And so we always want to make sure that our audience has the opportunity to interact and see everything that we have to show, because we don't want to just share the love with the people who can be right there. We want to share the love with everybody. And so that's what Sideshow Con is really striving to do. Our physical booth will have, because it's safe and private and there's not going to be crowds, we get some cool opportunities to do things that we might not otherwise get to do, like no plexiglass on the statues. We might get to swap out some elements so that there's new stuff for you guys to see when you come around, or come around online digitally. And we will be getting to display art prints, which is actually really cool because we don't usually have walls. So that's one of the ways in which we want to bring that interaction and celebration of fans closer to you guys in this difficult and distanced time. So again, check out side.show/con for more information. And now let's take a brief break. Cassidy, do you have any comments, questions? What are people saying about Comic-Cons in the chats right now?
We did actually have one quick question from Delvon on YouTube. He just wanted to know real quick, what would you suggest, digital or physical comics? I know it's a bit different from con, but
I mean, it's a valid question. Yeah, it's difficult to answer depending on your safety and availability of stores. I know very many people actually don't have stores that they can get to easily. There are a lot of retailers that do ship the books though. So if you prefer physical, I prefer physical. I know I don't prefer having 7 long boxes in my closet, but the tangible comic is something that you just can't replace for me. And I know that digital reader services like Comixology or wherever you get your digital comics, they do their best to give you lots of options depending on how you like to read. You can see 1 page at a time. You can see 2 pages at a time. You can do it panel by panel, which is actually a really cool experience. And I think it helps people who don't know how to read comics. It helps your panel following literacy and is also like watching a little animated movie. For me, nothing will ever replace the physical, the bag and board, but along with physical are the responsibilities of protecting the books, keeping them in boxes, organizing them if you're that. My hand keeps disappearing. I'm counting on my fingers. So there's a lot of time and investment that goes into physical. So it honestly comes down to what you prefer. I also don't like screen reading because I do have to wear my glasses for screen reading, but I don't have to wear them for physical reading. But there's something about the way in which writers and artists plan their page turns that you just can't recreate digitally. So my vote will always go to physical books, but again, there's a lot of factors in deciding what's right for you.
Yeah, just follow your heart. I'd say follow your heart. And be safe. No, but seriously, you
can never get a paper cut from a digital comic book.
Not with that attitude, Amy. But yeah, I mean, there is something I've actually never really enjoyed reading comics digitally until the world became, we had to start self-isolating and whatnot, because I was like, I can't obviously go out and get books, but I really want to go back and read some of these stories. And now I actually really love it. I'll read 1 or 2 comics digitally a week, and it's usually backlog stuff. I know me and Amy really both love the DC Universe app. It's fantastic if you are a DC Comics fan. There's so much stuff, but it really, really is great for. It's really great for like backlog. Like if there are some key issues, like right now, if you wanted to read the first appearance of Superman in print, you can't do it. And if you can, I have so many more follow-up questions, like of the original. But on the DC Universe app, you can go back and you can read the first appearance of Superman in Action Comics and the Detective Comics 27, the first appearance of Batman. Like you can go experience all those things. So there are a lot of really great things that you can do with some of these streaming apps. Comixology is great because it basically just recommends this is what you need to read. Next. It kind of takes the comic book fear out of saying like, I don't know where to start, which is what unfortunately hinders a lot of people from reading comics, because they're like, there's so much. And I don't want to go into a comic book store and have this person say, oh, you've never read every comic book ever. So
yeah, the 2 biggest factors for people are the accessibility of the resource, like can you get to a store, can you find the books, and the accessibility
Mm-hmm.
of where the heck do I start. And for some people that they can't get to a store, their store is not friendly, or they just
Mm-hmm.
they don't have access to those things. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
I don't think it's our job to necessarily say one is better than the other, but there are so many factors to accommodate what type of person you are and what type of reader you are. And as we saw,
Mm-hmm.
the industry, I mean, digital, monthly, and graphic novels were all the biggest support pillars of last year's comic book industry. So I think that's always important to remember. But I do really love the DC Universe app. And to quickly plug, as we transition into the stories we read this week and wanted to talk to you about, we did read everything on Comixology Unlimited and DC Universe. So those were great resources for these books. And those are subscription services that you don't have to pay per issue, and you get access to recolored versions of really old comics that, again, are, you might not, they exist physically, but you might not be able to find them at a store because they're old or out of print.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we Cassidy, were there any other are people reminiscing about Comic-Cons? Because I know I am.
They totally are. Adriana Gonzalez on the Let Your Geek Sideshow Facebook group says that this would have been her 23rd consecutive San Diego Comic-Con. So unfortunately, it's not happening, but she does love that companies like Sideshow are doing so much to keep the spirit alive. We also have Tim R on YouTube, who is talking about how he was in Atlanta around Dragon Con 2 years ago, and it was just like surreal seeing all the people on the street cosplaying and the hot weather. Just really cool stuff.
Yeah, Dragon Con, I've never been before, but I know that's a cosplay show first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love, there's so many amazing and there's amazing like niche conventions. I know there's a Whedon Con specifically for Joss Whedon stuff.
Oh,
there's,
right.
There's Gallifrey 1 for Doctor Who.
There's the Starfleet Internationals, Star Wars Celebration. I mean,
I love Monsterpalooza and Son of, like, those are
Monsterpalooza is dope.
Good. But let's get into the big C, the big Comic-Con. Speaking of the big C, we started with a story called The Big Con Job, because we broke these books down into kind of three core aspects of conventions, and we're gonna take a break from our usual style. We're not gonna tell you the plot. We're gonna tell you more about how these books interact with the idea of a Comic-Con.
Right.
And the Big Con Job by Jimmy Palmiotti, Matt Brady, and Dominique Stanton are all, this is the pros of cons. I was exceptionally proud of that. But this is about, this book is about professionals at Comic-Cons, whether that is the comic book creators who are invited guests or the people giving autographs. How do professionals interact with a convention? And so this was a fun book because the premise is that you follow a cast of former movie stars. They're kind of like the B movie space people, but they've been invited to a big convention, and I hate this phrase, but they're kind of washed up in the eyes of this convention. Yeah. And it really played with the dynamic of, and people see it all the time, like, how long is the line for Tom Hiddleston versus the line for a guy who was killed by a zombie in a monster movie, but was invited as well. But it doesn't mean that they're any less important. All these people get invited to these shows because someone out there is going to be a fan of this person. I have an embarrassing con story I want to share really fast. I was in England and I went to a convention while I was studying abroad, and it was a very small show. But I met Alice, oh my goodness, her last name always eludes me. Alice Kriege, who was in Star Trek. But I only knew her from a 1 minute screen time role she had in Thor. And that's why I went, and she had those pictures on her table. And so I asked her to sign the Thor one. But I admitted to her, I said, I only know you from Thor, and Thor is my favorite movie. I don't know you from Star Trek. I'm very sorry. But like everybody else was like, I think she played the Borg Queen. I think that's what it was. But I didn't know that at the time. And so, like, anyone can be a fan of any one thing for any reason. And so for me, it was a 1 minute screen time role in the Thor movies. Anyway.
The only time that I can relate at all was I was in line for food. Well, it wasn't like food. I was there was a big line for a lot of stuff, and I was trying to get away from somewhere. I was like, that guy looks familiar. I was like, oh, that's Nathan Fillion from Castle. Someone's like, you mean Nathan Fillion from Firefly? And I got reamed by people because I was like, I don't know what it is. I've never heard of it. And that's the only story that I have that's relatively. I was like, Castle's a good show, guys. Like, that's all I can contribute to that. Oh
my goodness. Yeah, we shouldn't be allowed at conventions. Anyways, so this book is really fun. And if we can start pulling up some of the art from it, I love that actually the opening shot is I think we've all been in one of these. If you've been to a convention and you're one of the people who manages to get off the convention floor to go to a panel, the book opens on these two actors, former sci-fi stars, giving a panel to maybe 8, 9, 10 people on that page. Yeah. And I think we've all been in one of those rooms. Yeah. And so this one captured the sense of, and we're not, most lay people are not comic book professionals. And so we don't know that feeling of being I'm not as well known as this other person. And I don't think that Palmiotti and company created this book for any reason of feeling jilted, but it captures that experience that there is definitely a disparity in the excitement levels over certain guests. But as suggested by the title, The Big Con Job is a very humorous, and I think not based in any true fact, story about professionals robbing a Comic-Con. They stage a heist, kind of an Ocean's 11 of San Diego Comic-Con. But it is a very interesting story, and I love that there's some scenes where you do actually see a rival superstar whose line, it's just him at one table, and his line is hundreds of people long, where they are all at their section in the autograph alley, and it is just not nearly as populated, which again I think emphasizes the importance of when you have those people that you get excited over, even if you are the person who gets excited over the big star versus the smaller performer, like you got to share that love because everybody's there as a part of the convention because they contributed to the fandom in some way. I also think that this is supposed to be a caricature of the Javits Center. I've only been to New York Comic Con twice, so I'm not as familiar, but you can tell in these books when it's San Diego being parodied versus like New York or a different con. And then finally in The Big Con Job, they do share a claustrophobic but accurate look at how crowded the San Diego convention floor is. Oof. And at San Diego, even though these people are not the stronger, I'm only saying this because these are not real people in the book. I feel bad like talking about you know, but these are made up characters for a made up movie. But even at San Diego, everybody is willing to participate in everything at San Diego because the act of being at San Diego. I also think that's a Brian Stelfreeze cameo, the artist with the yellow cap on. I think those are all artist cameos. But I could be wrong. I'd have to check. It looks a lot like Brian Stelfreeze. But that's another thing that we'll get into with one of the later titles is these comic book stories that deal with conventions are all love letters to the people who make these conventions run, the people who show up, the fans who show up. So The Big Con Job is a very interesting look from the professional side, created by comic book professionals, but in no way, I think, reflecting an exact experience. I think it's just an amalgam of the idea of when everybody is in such a flurry at a convention, it feels like some people are more excited about bigger names than others. And I mean, it's all over the place. But
and it's really hard to kind of, I'd say, I mean, it is the reality of what it is. Certain things are in the pop culture bubble, more strenuously than others. And it happens. I will say though, because I did a little bit more digging on Comic-Con, like just today alone, before I read Big Con Job, I didn't realize that in 1986, that Comic-Con was actually robbed of like $12,000 of like receipts and funds. And basically they said, we're not coming back because we don't know if we can. But literally almost all of the attendees and a ton of other people who are benefactors of of Comic-Con, they donated all that money back and then some. So I wonder if at all, if like Palmiotti said like, oh, that would be funny if like, what if it was the actual people inside who were sick of everyone? I wonder how much like that actual real event played into this book.
Oh, see, I wasn't familiar with that bit of Comic-Con history, so now I have no idea, and it very well might be related to it. It's a very
back and read it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder where the receipts add up on that one. So to kind of go along with this, we did ask you guys earlier in the week. We always ask a question that is related to the comic, but because we're not necessarily discussing the plot of these books so much as the experience of conventions and as they relate to comic books, we asked you guys in Let Your Geek Side show to share your favorite convention memories. We said there were imaginary bonus points if they were comic book related. We got some amazing stories. We couldn't include all of them here, but we did pick a couple for each kind of topic. So for kind of related to the pros of cons, meeting people that you admire, Devin R. Scott from the group shared last year, I was able to meet one of my favorite writers, Jerry Conway, and have him sign the first appearance of Fire Lord. He also explained he doesn't have that book anymore because he had to sell, but is now reconstructing his collection. Jerry Conway is one of the writers who influenced my comic writing, and I can actually say that I met one of my writing heroes.
That's incredible.
That always gives me the warm fuzzies when you get to meet someone who in a big or small way had any impact on you. And a lot of these guys are extremely humble and almost frustratingly humble when you're like, oh my goodness, your work means so much to me. And they're like, oh no, like it's so nice, especially when their profession mirrors your own and your own aspirations. So thank you, Devin, for sharing that story.
Yeah, that's honestly wonderful. We had another really great entry from Corey Carter, who said, this is a great story.
This one made me laugh so hard.
Yeah, we were laughing before the show. I was in Robert Englund's line and had to send I'm sorry,
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Elm Street fame. I was in Robert Englund's line and had to send my wife to get Kane Hodder's autograph because time was short. Kane thought the autograph was for her and got upset when he found out it was actually for me. When she pointed me out, I waved and he gave me a funny look for being in Robert's line.
So we almost had a Freddy versus Jason showdown right there, just because you had to mix and match your autograph lines.
Oh geez, that's hilarious. And he goes on to mention and say, P.S. Corey apparently also got the autographs of every person who had anything to do with Death and Return of Superman comics. So those are the infamous, the black background with the bleeding red Superman logo, and then the white one about 6 months later. But that's hilarious. You just have one of the, like, are they gonna make them fight right here? Because I will pay. Is this a bit? I will pay.
To the end of the Death and Return of Superman, though, that's another thing where it's always fun to have a book. Those are the best souvenirs, I think. When you take the one book, and it's not to flip it on eBay, it's not to whatever. It's when you can collect signatures from multiple people and even tell them the story of like, oh, I met this collaborator at this show or this show. Those are the really special treasures. And sometimes it takes a long time. If he's watching right now, Corey, let us know how long that took you and how many shows that took you. Cause I have a similar book. I got 5 autographs from people who worked on the first Jane Foster Thor book. And it took me 4 conventions to do that. And it's a lot of fun. It's like a scavenger hunt for yourself. The last one of the pros of cons, Dylan Montron shared. At SDCC in the hotel elevator, there was a gentleman in a motorized chair. His shirt had 80s X-Men on it, like Storm, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler. I complimented him on it, to which he replied, "Oh, thank you. I created them." And then Dylan goes on to explain he was dumbfounded until he looked at the man's badge, and it was Len Wein.
Len freaking Wein.
Like, I love those accidental moments as well. Like again, it's just, conventions are like no other, and I'm sure you made his day. Like, even to compliment a shirt, like, and we'll get into it when we get to the faith section, which is next. Like, complimenting other people, welcoming to the fandom, just sharing the love. That's what you're there for, and I'm sure those people no matter how many X-Men you created, like I'm sure it just brings joy when someone acknowledges you, even for something as simple as a shirt that I'm sure was a conversation starter for him. But that's so fabulous.
It's fantastic.
So with
So-
that, we will segue into the next section. These are two books that I absolutely adore. We checked out Faith it was volume 2, numbers 3 and 4, which
Right.
are called The Long Con or Crime at the Comic-Con. And Faith we chose as the emblematic representation of the fans of Comic-Con.
Right.
Faith was written by Jody Houser with Perry Perez and Marguerite Sauvage on the art. And you may remember from earlier in the year, we did have Jody Houser on our show, and I very aptly called her the queen of fandom comics. She writes all the things that deal with your favorite characters. I mean, Stranger Things, she's done Star Wars, she's done like everything that has a fandom tag to it that you would think of.
Mm-hmm.
So this book was really special. This is a Valiant comic series. We read this on Comixology Unlimited because Faith, she's the Psyot hero Zephyr in the Valiant universe. So she has like kind of telekinetic and psychic powers. Faith is first and foremost, before a superhero, she is a kind of a BuzzFeed style writer, but more than that, she is a super geek. And this 2-part story takes place at West Coast Fan Con, which was a made up little convention for the issue. And it deals with doppelgangers and again, convention crime that takes place in costume. And I love this cover by Kevin Wada because you can actually see Jake Wyatt and Chris Anka and Babs Tarr's traditional convention banners that you would see behind an artist in Artist Alley. And Faith's accomplice is smashing down somebody with one of the Comic-Con International aisle signs. Like those pop up everywhere.
Everywhere.
But so that was Kevin Wada's chance to throw a little shout out to some of his friends in there.
Great.
So what makes this book, I think, really fun is that Faith is not being a superhero at the convention. She's there to go get signatures and collect things and have fun and go to panels as a fan. And she actually wears a steampunk version of her own superhero suit. And I love this kind of opening because actually if you get a chance to watch the show later, pause it, take a look at all the off-color cosplays that are in this panel to avoid copyright issues. But there's a lot of fandom characters. I mean, you can see Harley Quinn, Korra, Aang the Avatar. You can see a blue Wolverine, Chewbacca. But best of all, Jody Houser writes in Faith's voice, and so it's a natural fit because Faith is a fangirl. But she implements convention tips throughout the book, and some of them get funny when the crime starts to happen. I mean, one of the convention tips is don't do crime, even in a mask. But she puts in genuine convention tips. Make sure your con bag has plenty of snacks in case you have trouble finding food and water. It's great to compliment cosplayers unless you're being gross or making people unsafe. If you have to stop for conversation, get out of the flow of traffic. Avoid long lines. Carry safety pins if you need to repair your costume. And the final one that she includes that I think is the most important is there are all kinds of people who go to conventions. Don't be a gatekeeper. Remember that everyone is welcome.
Right.
And so, I mean, Paul, do you want to speak a little bit to the fan experience at a convention?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I can only speak from the like I would say from a very selfish perspective of being a fan at Comic-Con because I've usually gone with people and it's like, all right, disperse and we'll meet up. So I've been very fortunate to be able to just go do what I want at cons. Like I didn't really have to schedule myself around other people. Not until, obviously I got a little bit older. But yeah, I think what makes Comic-Con great is that, I mean, there's still people, and I'm sure, and Amy, I know you for sure have people that you're still friends with, but people that that I met at Comic-Con that I still talk to. And we don't live anywhere close. I mean, I've got a friend, I believe he's now in Illinois. And the only time I've ever cosplayed ever is I went as Jesse Custer from Preacher. It's the only time I've ever cosplayed at a con ever. And he was also cosplaying as Jesse Custer. So it's kind of like the Spider-Man meme, the
pointing one.
Yeah. But I mean, that's really what it is. I mean, it doesn't, it's so funny to meet different people when you go to conventions, and we would love, wherever you're watching on whatever platform, we're streaming on a ton of different platforms right now. So wherever you're watching, let us know. But like, do you go in with plans and how your con works? Because what I think makes the fans of Comic-Con so great is like, well, if this doesn't work, I'll just go do something else.
Share your number one convention tips with us.
Yes, share your convention tips with the Comics Hall. And then there are ours, we own them now. So thanks. But
I don't think that's how it works.
Oh, does it? Oh, I don't know. But yeah, it's what's really great, I think, is the very last rule that Jody Hauser had said there is the most important rule in fandom in general is don't be a gatekeeper and assume that you know everything, because you go to conventions and I like to fancy myself as someone I'm like, I think I know a lot about comics, and then I'm buying or I'm looking at comics and I'm like, holy heck, like this guy's been collecting comics longer than I've been alive, and I've got so much to learn. And it's like it's so fun to just go to these conventions and just really kind of like humble yourself and realize that you're there to experience this thing that not everyone gets to be there. I mean, while it does happen every year, there's a ton of cons, there's only 120,000, which is not only, but there's only 120,000 people of, however many millions of people are in this country that get to go to that convention. So it's like, enjoy it and just celebrate, I think is something someone told me once at Comic-Con is like, I think they'd gone, it was my first Comic-Con, I believe in I think it was like 2000, what were we saying? I think it was like 2007 or something.
Yeah.
And someone told me, they're like, yeah, me and my wife have been coming for the last 20 years. And every year we just come and celebrate. We just enjoy being around a bunch of geeks and nerds. And, they're like, we work office jobs and we don't really get to do that. So we get to come here, relax. And that's like really what it's all about.
Yeah. And you were talking earlier about friends you make at conventions. I am now 16 games deep as a dungeon master with a group of friends that I have now known for 10 years. And we all met at Anime Los Angeles one year. Well, it was still at a hotel because it was such a small show. And now they are some of my closest friends. So sometimes it just happens magically like that. And I think the biggest thing to remember is because a lot of people, again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why some people don't buy comics regularly is because someone at their store, whether it was an owner, an employee, just another person there, was hostile to them or made them feel unwelcome. And so instead of someone approaching you or being at a con and clearly being new, instead of saying, you don't belong here because you don't know what you're doing, they're never going to learn what they need to be doing. They're never going to have fun. And I mean, there's no one thing that they need to be doing, but they're never going to open themselves up to that chance. If you take the time to help someone, welcome someone, don't be rude to them when you're all in line for the same exclusive. Then instead of never seeing them again, you might end up saying, I saw you last year. How are you doing? What's new? Like it's the thing where you have to welcome them, because those people are going to grow up to be your peers. They might be future comic book storytellers, but if you shut them out on their first go, I guarantee you many of them are never going to come back. And then you're just going to lose that wealth of storytelling, that cosplayer, that artist, that fandom, the person who's going to spend money on the books that you want to sell. If that's the case, you can't keep people out of this.
Right.
I will die on that hill. Like, you have to let everybody in, because those are the people. Those are the people that make the convention. You can have as many professional guests as you want, but if there's no other fans with you, it's going to be a very, very lonely show.
And if you've been to a convention, and because me and Amy are doing a show, so we can have this conversation currently, there's nothing better, like, to me, as two people who've been to plenty of Comic-Cons, than, someone coming up to you and being so excited because it's their first Comic-Con. Like, I mean, there's literally nothing better. And it's like that overwhelming, like, I can't believe I'm here, but also like, I've got to focus, but I don't know what to do next. And it's, and it's like, hey, maybe you just threw that cosplay together in 10 minutes, but it looks great because it's yours. it belongs to you. And that's ultimately, really what it is. And so like, to me, it's like, that was always my favorite part of going to cons. I mean, obviously, there was, I loved going to panels and whatnot, but like, of just interacting with people and just, getting to meet people and say like, hey, I've, worked on all of these different books, and maybe you've never even heard my name. And again, like Amy had said, like, I mean, I think that's why me and Amy get along so well, because we'll both die on that hill of let everyone in, to the fandom club. I think it's honestly, it's a lot better when you've got more people involved.
Yeah, and so actually, I want to use that chance to segue towards good interactions, fun interactions that we pulled from the Facebook group. But we do have one more picture from Faith that I love, and I just want to throw it in there. This is Faith and her friend, whose name I forget already because I just called him Legolas the whole time. This is them walking through Artist Alley, and again, that kind of fan and friend thing goes peer to peer. Perry Perez drew this segment, and again, this is like a pause the video, see if you can spot the cameos. There's Jeff Lemire, Ryan Stegman, Kelly Sue DeConnick, Jody Hauser, Gail Simone, Perry Perez is in here. Just like all of these, like, because he drew himself into it, and there's somebody dressed as Bender in the background. But like, pause this, see how many cameos show up. And we'll use this to segue. Jasmine Edwards shared, I was on my way to Artist Alley when I saw a familiar face. I stopped the guy and excitedly asked, "Excuse me, I hate to bother you, but are you Kieran Gillen?" He answered, "Unfortunately, yes," which is the most British thing ever. And then he dragged Jamie McKelvey over. It turns out they weren't even booked for the show, but they had come to see Stephanie Hans. And so that is, again, I think, an example of, while it does deal with comic book professionals, it's a great example of an instance where Kieran Gillen could have brushed her off. Kieran Gillen's not that type of guy, but yeah, someone could have brushed her off, and it could have been a totally different experience. But instead, you've given a fan a good story. Kieran and Jamie were on their way to support Stephanie Hans, who was also in the Artist Alley. So that's a great example. And then, do you want to read Matt Oldfield's, because it made me laugh way too hard?
Oh yeah, this is fantastic. So Matt Oldfield had said when he was 12, his family took a 2-week trip to California at the same time as SDCC. The show was closing in about 30 minutes, and we walk into the convention hall, and my very enthusiastic 12-year-old self went right up to the first dealer and asked, "Where's Stanley?" He replied, "Stanley who?" I said, "Do you even read the comics you sell?" The dealer starts laughing and says, "Oh, Stan Lee." Matt didn't meet Stan Lee that day, but his dad did buy him X-Men 141 and 142 from that same dealer. But it's just like, I love imagining little Matt just like, "Where's Stan Lee?"
I just love that you even read the comics you sell. I mean, that's not gatekeeping from a 12-year-old to a comics retailer professional, but that is just one of the funniest things. So we had to shout that out.
Yeah, I mean, even at 12, Matt Oldfield had no time for this man. He's like, "Where is Stan?"
I love that.
We're really curious, guys. Let us know. What was your first Comic-Con like? If you've been to, not Comic-Con, but what was your first convention experience like? Let us know, whether you're on Facebook, Twitter, many of the Facebook channels we're on, Instagram, and we'll try to reply to some of them. I don't know if we're going to have time to read any of them out loud today, but we really want to know what everyone's first convention was like.
Oh yeah, I definitely check the comments after the show in case I missed anything. So I want to hear all your stories, because it's fueling me as we get ready for Sideshow Con. Now, Cassidy, we did have a response from Corey Carter, right?
Yes, about the autographs for the Death and Return of Superman comics. He said that the comics took years to collect, but the autographs were in one day. They were doing a panel at Connecticut Comic-Con, and they were super awesome about signing it for free.
Oh wow, that's awesome! Because see, I would have thought it would be the other way around, where you get all the comics in one day from all vendors, and then the autographs would take years. But wow, to have everybody on a panel to do that's so awesome. I love because panels are another big thing that we're not even really going to touch on here. But like, I've had some cool experiences with creators who are very gracious after their panels, but I understand that also sometimes they have another engagement to get to right away. So Corey, that is really awesome that you were able to get all of those books signed. So congratulations on that awesome kind
And
of accomplishment.
that is great. And before we, oh wow, we have a whole book to cover, Amy.
I know, and it's gonna
no.
be just as chaotic to discuss as it was to read.
We're gonna be reading this like 12-year-old Matt Oldfield, just really quickly in one breath.
But before we get to that, I wanted to bring up a joke that I think is also very funny. A very particular, the first comic that came to my mind when I thought of conventions. If you've read a DC comic in the last 5 years, you've seen one of these beautifully rendered Snickers ads. And one of the recent ones was the superheroes at a convention dealing with a cosplayer who was dressed as Larfleeze, but he actually is Larfleeze because you're not you when you're hungry. But Jessica Cruz and another child, they managed to calm him down, and he compliments the Justice League on their great costumes. Yeah, if you've read a DC comic in the last 5 years, you've turned the page on a cliffhanger to find one of these beautifully done, quite clever comic books or comic strips for a Snickers ad. And if you're like me, you've probably wondered, wow, how did we get from the Hall of Justice to a convention center in one panel?
Well, they're superheroes; they can fly.
Yeah, and I mean, I love the ideas like Faith of superheroes going to a convention. Anyways, I thought that was funny. I just wanted to shout that out. If you have a love-hate relationship with those DC Snickers cartoons, also let us know in the comments.
100%.
But speaking of DC and chaos, the last book we read on DC Universe was the main man himself. We read Lobo's Convention Special #1,
Yes.
which symbolizes we've done the pros of the cons, we've done the fans. What's left to cover? Oh, probably the absolute freaking chaos of actually being at a comic book convention. Who better to help us go through it than Lobo?
See, that's funny. I've always had people be super polite. I've had plenty of arm, room. That's weird. That's absolutely untrue. Yeah. Lobo, I mean, this entire convention special, which again, we don't have time to, really dig into it, but there are some great panels. And Chris, if you can kind of show just some of those as we sort of rapid fire maybe through some of these, but it really does a good job of showing the absurdity that is Comic-Con, and it's just like all of the in one of them, I believe it was at Alan Moore's hair that they're selling.
The comic begins, and what we're looking at now is Lobo is so excitedly reading a book, he tears it to shreds and then says, "Ah, frag, I need another copy. Where am I going to find another copy in all the galaxy?" And the vendor says, "Well, why don't you go buy another one at a convention?" And he says, "Oh, I'm going to get ripped off. They're going to have it in a Polymar bag, and it's going to be $1 million, and they're not going to charge me cover price." But he's got no other options if he really wants to read his Superman. I think it's a Superman comic he's reading. If he really wants to read his comic, he's going to jet off to San Diego Comic-Con, which gets a beautifully, accurately drawn kind of caricature in the book. And once he gets to the convention floor, this is a look of him at the convention floor, and we don't have time to go over every detail, but it is amazing. I think my favorite sign is rare water damaged comics, and then comics that have been kept in a dank basement. He's also putting out his cigar on a Marvel Comics #1. There's a half naked lady cosplayer someone is making comments about, and it's all. And Lobo really makes fun of the collector aspect, the collector culture of Comic-Cons, but it's the unreasonable collectors of Comic-Con.
Oh, 100%. And his, as you guys all saw a second ago, his face of it whipping around, that's exactly what it is. It doesn't matter how many times I've gone to Comic-Con, I still do that. And it's wow, I can't believe this is all here. It's yeah, dude, you did it last year, but it's still so impressive every year, and it's so overwhelming and daunting, and it takes someone like the main man Lobo to really just kind of walk in and kind of shine a light on some of this. I do love all of the all of the sign up there that says, "Hey, yo." On top of it doesn't matter what the sign is, you're gonna come here and you're gonna buy it anyways, and that's really what a lot of it is. People will wait in line and they don't even know why they're waiting. I
also like the one that says girls comics context. But clearly Lobo didn't read Faith before this, because he is committing one cardinal sin of, if you need to stop and gawk or talk to somebody, get out of the main aisle. But Lobo does go through the convention, and we do get to see some cameos because comic book creators love to make cameos.
Oh yeah.
As Paul mentioned, we get to see a very funny Alan Moore cameo where he's selling his hair. Lobo calls it an absolute dweeb fest.
They're postmodern penance locks, Amy.
Postmodern penance locks. He takes a look at. I like the one where he's punching people, and the convention security says those sound effects are copyright to Doug Munch, which is another just the sound effects are chunked and clacked and chubunt, which are. Like this book was so much funnier than I was expecting. I actually am not familiar with Lobo comics, and I know he's super crass and crazy, but this was so funny for someone who's been to conventions. And he makes fun of Impact Comics, which was a DC Comics imprint that apparently to him didn't make much of an impact. And he visits the Marv booth, the distinguished, because they're the distinguished competition this time. And you see the Marv people printing books from a printer, and piranhas are snapping them up. And he says, I knew they had to have a system. Nuff said, Tiger, which of course he's aping Stan Lee and Mary Jane Watson in one catchphrase as well, which I just think it's so funny because it's a caricature. This is not what really happens at conventions, but I can definitely see why people think that's exactly what it is.
100%, yeah.
But again, it's dramatic and overblown. And then my final favorite one is a gentleman putting on gloves to assess a pre-Batman DC comic.
Oh, it's so funny.
He asks if it's a microscopic mote of smudging. Another detail that I loved when Paul and I were in review, the guy behind them has a sign that says the end is mile nigh. If you've ever been to a comic book convention, you might have seen the Mile High Comics booth, which is undoubtedly one of the biggest retailer book booths. And this panel does end with the gentleman taking the book out of the bag, and Lobo spits on it, and the man has a heart attack and dies. So I think as collectors, we can all kind of empathize with that. But we did pull a couple more stories just before we wrap up. The Lobo convention special is available on DC Universe if you want to check it out. It's an absolute must read for anyone who has been to a convention. If you haven't, it might scare you a little bit, but don't worry, Lobo has assured that no comic book convention will ever end up like that again. But we did pull a couple more stories of convention craziness. Oh yeah, Paul, if you want to.
So I mean, one that was really funny was Kana Nguyen shared, and this is a good one, guys. Buckle up. I almost ran over Stan Lee. It was the early '90s, and it was the biggest convention I'd ever been to at the Minneapolis Convention Center. This was before Stan Lee really exploded into pop culture. He was late for his signing, so I decided I should probably check out the rest of the convention. Exiting the hall and rounding the corner, I almost knocked over an old gentleman, and it was only due to my quick reflexes that I didn't completely knock him down. That was Stan Lee. He ultimately wasn't able to do the signing due to time constraints, but at least they have a good story.
Yeah, I'm sure it was not related to the fact that you almost knocked him down. No, Khan did explain that there was connecting flights involved. We trimmed the story a little bit for length, but if you are in the Let Your Geek Sideshow Facebook group, check out our post. I believe that the Lobo comic was the cover image we used for this question. It's
still pinned up top.
There are dozens of other stories we didn't get to share, but every single one of them brought a smile to my face in some way or another. And then finally, this almost seems like an experience that Lobo would have at the show. Adriana Gonzalez, who, again, 23 consecutive Comic-Cons mentioned earlier in the show. Early 2000s San Diego, I'm walking down one of the convention aisles back when you could actually navigate through there. And suddenly I'm flying sideways. No idea how that happened. My brother catches me and says, Gene Simmons, security guy, just pushed you out of the way. Apparently, I walked too close to them as they were walking. I didn't even see them, and I didn't even care. Oh, well. And that's another thing where sometimes it'll be like, you don't know why a crowd is rushing past you. And it's like, oh, that's Stan Lee being escorted, or that's Gene Simmons, apparently. There was one year at Comic-Con with Sideshow where our booth became so packed you could not move. But it was because the Justice League was arriving at the DC booth just across the aisle from ours. So everybody rushed into our booth to get the best vantage point to see Jason Momoa walk his way up the stairs, which I don't blame them. But you know, Comic-Con, that is one of the things that happens is just it is an ever-changing ocean. The tide goes in, the tide comes out, and you just kind of gotta go with the flow. Which that is the true chaos of the convention. And I miss it, and I'm sad we're not going to have that same experience this year. But so Paul, you're just going to have to cap the line for me at Sideshow Con when I go into film live streams. Sorry, you can't go in for another 45 minutes because the line's too long.
You're the front and end of the line.
I'll feel right at home. Man, I mean, we could wax poetic about comic book conventions for hours, but I think we got to wrap it up here. I so look forward to all the comments that you guys shouted out. And Cassidy, any closing thoughts from our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, etc.?
We just have a lot of love for reminiscing on Comic-Con and just other cons all over the comments and the channels.
Excellent. Well, wonderful. If you guys are all feeling nostalgic and you're ready for another con experience, please don't forget to join us for Sideshow Con beginning on July 20th all the way through the 26th. You can go to side.show/con. I think pre-registration might still be open. We're doing daily live streams. I will be the voice for a lot of those live streams, so you can come hang out with me and we'll talk shop. We got a lot of really cool content that we can't even begin to explain to you yet. But you will want to tune in every day. It's going to be worth it. And you know what? The best part is there are no crowds, no lines. You can wear your pajamas if you want. This is the most, as Paul said, easy fit, relaxed fit Comic-Con.
Yeah.
Most relaxed fit Comic-Con. And we hope to see you guys there. Our producer has informed us pre-registration is open till July 20th. So don't say we didn't warn you. You still got time. And we will, you get some cool perks for that. So do check that out, side.show/con. And don't forget, we will be having an episode of the Comics Hall. We will probably put a little bit more about that on our social next week once we start announcing all of the convention excitement. And we're excited to see you guys there. Thank you guys so much for joining us this week as we get hyped.
Thank you guys so much.
I am ready. I am ready for convention season.
Oh yeah, we're in the thick of it now, and relaxed fit for everyone. You guys can all hang out and get ready for Sideshow Con again on July 20th. But we're hard at work here. Me, Cassidy, Amy, everyone, but that's bringing you this show right now. We've got a lot that we're bringing you guys, so we really can't wait to see you that whole entire week.
And if you want to prep over the weekend, again, the books we read today were The Big Con Job. It's available on Unlimited. We read Valiant's Faith Volume 2, available on Unlimited. And then the Lobo Convention Special #1. There are dozens of other comic books that take place at conventions. So check those out. Get yourself ready. Pre-register for Sideshow Con. And we'll see you next week. Until then, I'm Amy.
I'm Paul.
And this has been The Comics Hall. Thank you for joining us.
Boom, 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 boom.